The wind, that had forever tasted of sun-baked grass and warm dust, now carried a bite so alien that even the horses shuddered. Khal Drogo stood at the prow of the red-hulled cog and let the salt spray sting his cheeks, refusing to wrap the bearskin cloak around his bare torso. The cloak was the first concession he had ever made to a world beyond the endless plains of the Dothraki Sea, and he resented it more than he had resented the timidity of the Khals he had broken or the soft lies of Korth's perfumed merchants. Yet he wore it, because the woman he loved had told him the cold ahead would test his blood in ways no enemy Khal ever could. Daenerys watched him from the quarterdeck, silver-gold hair whipping free of its braid, as if the wind itself sought to claim strands of moonlight. Behind her, Aggo and Rakaro muttered to each other in uneasy low Valyrian, their dark eyes casting wary glances at the iron-bound timbers, at the sailors in wolf fur caps, at the green-black swells that rose higher than any grass wave they had ever dared ride. Sea crossing was taboo to true Dothraki, the old men of Vaes Dothrak whispered. Yet a Khal who had promised his unborn son the world's throne could not turn aside because the water was deep. The fleet had been stolen piecemeal, prize by prize, from the slavers of the Basilisk Isles and the spice factors of Korth. When Drogo had first ordered the horse lords to learn the language of salt and tar, half his khalasar spat and begged the Mother of Mountains for forgiveness. Those who refused were given to the sea, chained upside down so that the first swallow of brine filled their nostrils and mouths at once. The rest learned quickly. 10,000 horses stamped on the top decks and stalls crudely hammered together from scavenged planks. The sound was a thunder that never ceased, a heartbeat that reminded every man of who they were even as the horizon swallowed them whole. It was Illyrio Mopatis who had whispered north. The fat magister, fingers heavy with rings, had sat in the captain's cabin on a night of black stars and counted enemies on rings of sausage-thick pork. The south bleeds itself, he had said, oiling his beard with roast drippings. Baratheon and Lannister tear at each other while Tyrell sniffs the carcass. March your screams to the neck, my fierce friends, and they shall stand aside like grass before the scythe. But Daenerys had seen the gleam in Illyria's pale eyes and asked of the lands that lay above, the cold place where the wolves howled, and the kings of winter kept faith with a line older than Aegon's dream. Take the north first, she told her sun and stars later that night, tracing the map's jagged coastline with her fingertip. The rest will come begging once the wolves are broken. Drogo had laughed, a sound like stone striking iron, and said a cow needed grass, not snow. Yet at dawn he rode through the fleet to every ship, calling each rider by name, promising them the choicest spoils, pelts of white bear, castles of stone, wives as pale as milk above black stallions. And they believed, for he was Drogo. 6 weeks of east to west storms later, the horses screamed at the stink of kelp. Ice clung to the rigging like mold, and sailors whispered that ghosts howled in the fog that crept from the north. When at last towers of gray stone rose beyond a river mouth wide enough to swallow the entire khalasar, Daenerys could scarce feel her toes. The captain, a timid volantine bought with a ransom of rubies, called the place White Harbor. Beyond it, he warned, lay the woods and hills of the Wolf's Den, land sworn to house Stark. A northern lord would flay an ironborn in the old days, he said, and call it justice. Let him flay. Ser Jorah scoffed, hand on the pommel of his longsword. Your husband's riders will roast his skin on a spit and laugh. On the ridge above the harbor town, Bran the Broken dreamed of wings of flame and a stallion of smoke. Ravens chattered in the godswood as he clutched the carved arm of the weirwood throne he now used in place of saddle. Winterfell's ravens had flown to every bannerman already, Umber Manderly Karstark, bearing a single word, riders. But ravens could not capture the fury or the speed of what sailed toward them. Brannon had seen it only in murky green dreams, a storm of dark braids and curved blades, horses whose hooves rang like iron on stone. Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell in all but name, rode south with 500 mounted archers sent by Lord Bolton, intent on meeting this new threat before it reached their fields. Catelyn's prayers echoed in the great hall as she watched her second son slip beyond the gatehouse. Eddard, trapped in King's Landing as the Hand, knew nothing yet. Maester Lewin's quill scratched parchment, even as he fretted over the lack of ravens, brave enough to cross a sea stormed by invaders. Drogo's khalasar swarmed over the docks like smoke poured from shattered pottery. The white knife's tide had never seen so many hooves. Ships burned in their berths, bright orange blooms against the iron sky. Harbor watchers fled into alleys only to be cut down. The Dothraki claimed no prisoners save those beautiful enough for tents. The Manderly's guards barely formed lines before the gates when Drogo and a dozen blood riders crashed through, aurochs carving half-moons of gore. The harbor lord's wife threw herself from a tower to escape feverish hands. By dusk the white walls ran red. Yet the north was vast, and winter's teeth lay everywhere. The Dothraki soon discovered the icy earth drank blood but gave nothing back. Their horses balked at frozen streams and slipped on frost-slick stone. Herds of elk scattered at their muffled approach. The sun's strength failed early, leaving campfires struggling beneath tents that cracked like brittle reeds. Aggo lost 2 mares in the first fortnight. Their corpses were stripped for meat before dawn, but the meat tasted of rot. The khalasar murmured, "No insult, only fear," but Drogo rode through their circles with torch in hand and burned the rotten meat on a pyre of wet pine branches. He spoke no words. His gaze was enough. Robb's outriders struck at the tail first, slashing supply cords, setting loose half-starved goat herds, and vanishing into the pines. The Dothraki had no foothold in forest warfare. They relied on open ground, yet every clearing held a surprise. At Barrowton's edge, Manderly archers hid in barrow mounds older than the Andals, releasing shafts that punched through light leather like awls. Rakaro fell with an arrow through his bicep that blackened by the hour. Jiki wept when the wound stank sweet. A healer from Marine begged to take the arm before the rot spread to Rakaro's heart. Drogo allowed it and sat beside the boy all night, while the khalasar kept silent vigil. Daenerys climbed the Barrow Hill at dawn. She felt something ancient in the stones, something that shivered beneath the world's crust, older than old Giz or Valyrian freehold. She pressed a palm to the moss-slick granite and whispered a promise. Her son would not die in this cold hell. The promise left her lips like smoke, but lingered on the wind. When she turned, Ser Jorah was kneeling, holding a strange blade he had taken from a fallen Stark, a long sword of castle steel, the fuller etched with white tree and 7-pointed star. He asked permission to wield it in the name of House Targaryen. She granted it, and in that moment, the exiled knight felt the heat of dragons, though no fire warmed the dawn. Jon Snow, meanwhile, stood atop the wall at Queen's Gate and watched columns of smoke stain the sky far to the south. Rumors had reached Castle Black of ships stolen from Korth, of screamers on horses that swept through White Harbor. Lord Commander Mormont sent ravens farther south, but no reply came. "If those riders reach us," Eleazar Thorne sneered, "they'll freeze before they climb the wall." Jon was not so sure. He had seen Dothraki once, in King's Landing, when he accompanied his father on a diplomatic tour. He remembered the look in their eyes, wild, unbroken, feral as wolves. And he knew how hard wolves could bite when cornered. A moon's turn after landfall, Drogo reached the village of Widow's Watch, perched high above a ragged shore. The wooden palisades splintered beneath the first charge, yet the victory was hollow. Inside the granary, they found barrels of oats, but half had molded. The salmon stores were salted with pine needles to stretch the loss of the fleet. Worse, the mares foaled in blood and died in frost the same night. The Dothraki buried them beneath cairns of stone, for the ground was too hard to dig. Daenerys felt the spirits of the place gathering around her. In the weirwood grove near the ruin's edge, faces carved into the pale trunks seemed to weep red sap. She knelt on frozen moss, reciting prayers she scarcely believed, and imagined she heard replies in the sigh of needles above. When she rose, a pale direwolf stood watching from the trees. No ordinary beast. Its eyes glimmered with an intelligence that sent chill through her bones, deeper than any winter could. Yet it did not snarl. It turned and loped silently east. Later, hunters would find hoofprints shadowed by pawprints, as if the wolf led them on unknown paths. Robb struck at dawn of the 23rd day, beneath a tattered banner depicting Grey Wind's snarling head. The northern host numbered 4,000. Sworn shields of umber heavy with chain, Manderly men-at-arms with shields of sea-green, Karstark riders bearing black sunbursts. The Dothraki outnumbered them 2-1. Yet so many horses had grown gaunt that when the horns blew, only Drogo's elite blood riders led the charge. Ice-crusted earth shattered under hooves as the two forces met in a roar of steel and splintered bone. Stark spearmen had lapped their spear butts with rawhide to keep grips firm in gloves. They braced kneeling as horsemen thundered toward them. The first rank vanished beneath hooves, but the second skewered mounts already slick with sweat. Screams rose. The air turned red. Robb found Drogo in the melee, direwolf cloak billowing like broken wings. The warhammer he bore had been cast by Mott of Winterfell himself. 2 blows shattered a bloodrider's collarbone and helm. But Drogo's arak flashed like moonlight on water, cleaving the hammer's haft. Before Robb could raise shield, the curved blade bit his thigh, carving a crescent that sprayed bright arterial blood. Grey Wind leapt, fangs tearing at Drogo's arm, but the Khal caught the dire wolf by furred scruff and hurled him aside with shocking strength. Robb staggered, vision swimming. Only the intercession of Theon Greyjoy's arrow, loosed from a hillock, forced Drogo back. By battle's end, fields north of Widow's Watch steamed, as if winter itself exhaled. Hundreds of Dothraki lay dead, their braids shorn by Stark swords to shame them in the next life. Yet Robb's wound festered, and the northern host limped west with half its number. Drogo spitted 3 captured Karstarks and fed them to their own watchhounds. But even that savage feast earned only grim silence from the Khalasar. They had lost too many, too swiftly, to men they considered sheep. That night, Daenerys confronted her husband before the great bonfire built to honor fallen steeds. She spoke in the common tongue so that Mormont and the slaves could witness. "You promised them the world," she reminded him, placing a hand on her rounded belly. "This is only the first kingdom." Drogo touched her cheek, gentle despite the dried northern blood on his knuckles. In his dark eyes she saw doubt for the first time. "Grass is life," he murmured in Dothraki, "but this land is stone and ice." She tasted resin on the air, the pine, the pitch, the iron, and told him of dragonfire living in her veins. "Stone and ice melt before fire," she said. "We must become that fire." The next day, Drogo ordered every tent sewn with wool instead of silk, every horse draped in bare fur pelts traded from terrified hill clans. They raided Karhol's coastal villages for lantern glass, melted it, and lined arrowheads so they would shatter into icy shards inside flesh. Dothraki bowstrings were waxed and rebraided with sinew from northern elk, tighter, stronger. When the Manderlys attempted a surprise night raid along the Barrowlands, they found the Khalasar awake and ready, campfires banked low to preserve night sight. Screamer arrows sang from darkness in murderous harmony. The northern spears broke. The rout was ruthless. Catelyn Stark wept as ravens returned bearing wounds instead of words, their feathers cut away and replaced by bloody braids so small they could only be a message, each bird a scalp. The dread that took Winterfell's halls was colder than any storm. Bran prayed beneath the heart tree, pleading with nameless gods he barely understood. In his dreams he flew above pine forests stained crimson and tasted ash on the wind where villages had once stood. He saw a silver mare foal under northern lights, its hide steaming in frosty night. He saw a black stallion with eyes of blue flame standing alone on an ice-white plain, staring at something moving beyond sight. Beyond the wall, in the lands of the free folk, rumors spread of horse lords whose shadows fell long across the snows. Mance Rayder sent a clutch of raiders south to learn more, led by a spearwife named Val Duo. They skirted Stark patrols, witnessing burning holdfasts and hearing ghostly hoofbeats in the still of night. They returned, claiming the invaders fought like a storm, here one moment, gone the next, leaving behind nothing but frost and fear. Mance pondered whether these new foes might be turned against the crows. If chaos ruled south of the wall, the night's watch would crumble, and the horn of winter might finally sound. Drogo marched west now, intent on the king's road. His vision had shifted, no longer to simply sack Winterfell, but to sever the north from the rest of Westeros entirely, holding Moat Caelin's causeway like a dagger at a throat. War bands melted ahead of him. The Umbers tried to rally atop the last river, building dikes to flood the valley, but the Dothraki dismounted and moved through the hills on foot, unheard in velvet snow, striking from behind. When Greyjohn Umber met Drogo in single combat, two giants of different worlds, the clash shook the frozen bank. Umber's greatsword shattered Drogo's arak, yet the Khal caught the blade's broken length and drove it into Umber's chest, twisting until bone cracked. The Great Yon's death howl echoed down the water like a doom knell. The north truly bled. Still, the land fought back. Frostbite gnawed at riders' ears and toes. Horses died of colic when icy wells cracked their guts. Snowstorms buried supply wagons in minutes. Rakaro's amputated arm stump froze black beyond the wrist. When fever claimed him, Daenerys closed his eyes and ordered his body burned with the horses he had once cherished. The khalasar keened, the wail blending with wind until even Drogo felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. It was on that bitter night a stranger rode into camp. Clad in midnight black, cloak rimmed with frost, the bearded man introduced himself as Benjen Stark of the Night's Watch. He came unarmed, bearing only a message. "Turn back." Winter, he said, marched south behind them, and something older than any khalasar stirred in its shadow. Drogo laughed and offered him his pick of captured wives. Benjen smiled sadly, refusing. "You fight men in earth," he warned. "But what comes for us now is neither." He turned and vanished into swirling snow, leaving the riders shaken. Daenerys could not sleep afterward. She walked among horses, feeling the cold reach through her boots into bone, thinking of Benjen's eyes, gray, ancient, weary. She thought of the direwolf that had watched her in the Gods' Wood, and wondered if the old gods were as real as the Red Priests claimed the Lord of Light was. She kneeled in her tent, pressing hands to belly round with Rhaego, and whispered lullabies in High Valyrian. Outside, embers of dying fires hissed as snow covered them like shrouds. At Winterfell, Robb's fever broke after 9 days, though Maester Luwin warned the wound might lame him for life. Catelyn wrote letters to King's Landing, beseeching Robert to send knights north to aid them. But no raven returned. Rumor said the king hunted a great boar in the Kingswood. Rumor said the queen kept him drunk. Rumor said wolves could howl at his gates and he'd never hear. The north stood alone. Robb insisted on standing in the great hall to address his bannermen, leaning on Grey Wind, who growled low and constant. "We will not yield Winterfell," he swore, voice still weak but eyes burning. "If the Khal wants our hearts, he'll choke on wolf bones first." Drogo reached Winterfell's outskirts as the first true blizzard of the season descended. Snow blew so thick one could not see a horse's head. Yet the Dothraki pushed forward, seeking high stone walls described by frightened farmers. They found only white dark. Scouts vanished. Horses stumbled into drifts taller than men. Drogo called a halt and ordered fires, but greenwood hissed and died. Aggo suggested retreat to the barrows for shelter, but the Khal refused. "We burn them out or we freeze," he growled. So they waited, camped in the lee of a ridge, huddled beneath hides while snow piled around them like burial mounds. Within Winterfell's walls, Bran felt the storm as a heartbeat of the world. Ravens shrieked at the heart tree, its red leaves rattled like bones. In dream, he flew over snow dunes where dark shapes moved, men or monsters, he could not tell. He saw a tent of black and gold, fires dead within, and in its center a crumbled brazier where embers glowed blue. He flew closer and saw the embers were eyes. They opened, and from them rose whispers of the language of dead men. Bran woke screaming. On the 5th night, the blizzard ceased as abruptly as it began. Dawn revealed the khalasar half buried. Scores of horses lay frozen upright, manes crusted with rime like frosted banners. Some riders never woke, their breath stilled mid-exhale, lips cracked with ice. Drogo cursed Daenerys' pale gods, pulling corpses free with his bare hands until nails tore. He ordered surviving riders to mount. They would attack Winterfell now, before another storm sealed their fate. But as they crested the ridge, they saw the castle still distant, across open fields, newly blanketed in flawless white. No wall of stone confronted them. Only silence and a sweep of snow glittering under rising sun. They advanced. Robb had positioned his remaining archers atop the battlements, though the chill numbed fingertips until arrows rose in uneven waves. Catapults hurling pots of pitch failed when the tar froze solid mid-air. Theon suggested lighting entire wagons of hay on fire and rolling them downhill, but the snowdrifts swallowed wheels. In the end, they relied on stout gates and thicker walls, and on winter's fickle mercy. But Drogo would not be denied. Screams split the morning as Kashis scaled outer walls using hooks of forged ice spikes driven into mortar seams. Fire arrows arced from above, kindling dry hides on climbing packs. Men blazed, fell, and were buried at once by soft powder. Others took their places. It was then a horn sounded beyond the tree line to the north. A pallid note, low and mournful. Every man on both sides froze, breath clouding in sudden hush. Another horn, farther off, answered. Then a third, distant but thrumming through marrow. Snow on rooftops trembled. Horses reared, eyes rolling white. Even the direwolf gray wind backed away, tail tucked. Bran looked to the skies and saw ravens fleeing south in black torrents. From out of the pine woods emerged a column of shapes walking 2 by 2, tall as men, but gaunt, flesh pale as moonlit bone, armored in rime. Shadows of blue fire burned where eyes should be. Swords of glass and frost reflected dawn in shards of murdered light. The others had come. Drogo stared, uncomprehending. The tales of haunted north meant nothing to him. He raised his arak, but breath fogged thick, and every droplet of sweat on his bare chest crystallized into needles of ice. He moved to shout orders, yet sound died on his tongue. Around him, Dothraki dropped torches as flames guttered and vanished, starved by a cold that swallowed heat itself. Robb recognized ancient doom in those silent ranks, but his men were too exhausted to run. They gathered behind the gate, swords shaking. Maester Luwin clutched a dragon-glass blade brought long ago from the Night's Watch cache. It felt no heavier than fear. The others marched unhurried, leaving no footprints. The first line reached a circle of dead riders half frozen in their saddles, and with a touch of frostblade, they rose again, eyes burning cold blue. Whites. The horrors shambled forward, moaning in voices muffled by snow-packed throats. Khal Drogo, refusing to yield, charged. His stallion's hooves drummed once, twice, then skidded as icy mist gathered beneath. A white horse burst from beneath snow, jaws filled with icicle teeth that tore at the living beast's throat. Drogo vaulted free, rolling, rising in one fluid motion. His broken arak flashed, shattering a white's skull. Bone dust swirled. The white took another step before collapsing. Daenerys watched from the ridgeline, terror churning with a strange exhilaration. Here was the fire she had promised. Not flame, but war that would burn the world clean. Her son kicked within her, fierce and restless. She sensed prophecy unfolding, though its shape eluded her. Suddenly she remembered Benjen Stark's warning. Neither men nor earth. She shouted for Jorah to find fire, any fire. But the night was already battling 3 whites, castle-forged steel dull against unfeeling flesh. One blow lodged in gristle, refusing to cut. Jorah cursed, kicked away, lost footing. Aggo flung a torch that sputtered but lit one white's greasy hair. Flames licked, yet the creature fought on until fire reached bone. Drogo forced back another whose armor glittered like starlight. Their blades met with a sound like winter wind against glass, a chime too pure to be mortal. Drogo's blade cracked, shards tinkling to snow. Frost spread up the metal into his gauntleted hand, biting flesh. He ripped free, leaving skin behind. Blood steamed briefly before freezing into ruby beads. The other slid forward, cutting a lazy arc aimed for his throat. And then gray wind launched, barreling to the being with impossible ferocity. Direwolf fangs closed on icy armor, teeth cracking. The other staggered, unnatural voice keening. Drogo seized a fallen torch, ramming flame into the wound Grey Wind had opened. The ice buckled, frost armor shattered. In a spray of sudden mist, the creature came apart, shards collapsing like broken glass tinkling across marble. All wights near it screamed and fell still, lifeless once more. A lull swept the field. Every eye turned to Drogo, Northmen and Dothraki alike. In that heartbeat of hush, he roared a challenge to the dawn, wordless but full of fire, denied the world. He lifted the torch high, and those Dothraki still able rallied, seizing every ember they could. Northern archers, seeing the effect, lit arrows in braziers hastily reignited with pitch. Black-fletched fire rained on the whites. Where flame kissed rotten flesh, ice melted. Where dragon glass found heart, icy magic shattered. The others, realizing threat, fell back, cloak-like shadows swirling in sunlight that did not warm. They melted into pine shadows as suddenly as they'd come, leaving only twitching corpses behind. Silence claimed the battlefield. Drogo, chest heaving, looked to Winterfell's walls and met Robb Stark's eyes across the snow. Two young lords of war, separated by walls of stone and lakes of blood. Between them lay nightmares of ice. Robb, guided by Maester Luwin's whispered counsel, signaled the gates to open. He limped forward on a spear crutch. Grey Wind at his side, flank slit and bleeding, but proud. Drogo advanced alone, Arak ruined, torch guttering Tatar. They met mid-field. Words came slowly. Robb thanked Drogo for saving his life. Drogo spat blood and denied saving anyone but his own pride. Yet the acknowledgement stood. Neither host had strength for further slaughter, not with a greater enemy prowling. In curt, halting phrases, they brokered an impossible truce. The Khalasar would winter in the ruins of Moat Cailin, guarding the neck against the white horrors. The north would send grain and timber from untouched western valleys to sustain the horses. When the snows melted, they would decide if honor demanded resumed war. As dawn broke, Daenerys descended the ridge, walking between rows of dead men whose hearts no longer beat in sun or snow. She felt Rhaego turn within, restless as the wind. She placed a hand on Drogo's wounded arm, the frostbite already creeping purple, and whispered of dragonfire that would soon be born. Drogo closed his eyes, hearing in her voice the promise of heat deep under ice, the song of wood crackling in a hearth, of a boy's laughter in spring. For the first time since setting foot on frozen shore, Khal Drogo felt the north breathe. Far above, a raven wheeled under a blood-orange sun. Its shadow moved west, toward distant sea, toward lands yet unaware that winter now rode on hoofbeats that echoed beyond the world's edge. The wolves of the Barrowlands howled beneath a bruised sky, while the Khalasar wound southward, their once proud banner of cracked leather and silver bells dragging in slush and mud. Snow came in gray curtains, thick as smoke from a funeral pyre. Then the clouds would rip open to reveal shrill blue emptiness before closing again in boiling fury. Every day the Dothraki learned a new cruelty of the cold. How sleet could flay a cheek raw as any arak, how hoofrot crept up a stallion's leg like poison, how a man might wake to find his braid frozen to the dirt and break half of it off rising. Yet Khal Drogo rode at the column's spear point with the broken haft of his arak lashed across his back like a scar he refused to mend. Each step was a vow. The blue-eyed shadows would not have his blood or his sons. At his side rode Robb Stark, swaddled in bare fur and bound to a splinted saddle. The wound in his thigh bled anew each morning, but he hid the limp beneath a mask of northerner pride. The direwolf Grey Wind padded just ahead, muzzle still bearing frost scars from the battle beneath Widow's Watch. Sometimes the beast would pause, hackles lifting at sounds the men could not hear, and all conversation would fall away until the wolf moved on. Between Khal and Lord, there was no easy camaraderie, only the brittle alloy of necessity. Yet steel forged in winter's cold grows hardest, and neither man failed the other when the wind turned murderous or whites prowled the tree line. They traveled toward Moat Cailin, a labyrinth of ancient basalt towers thrust from the swamplands like broken teeth. The causeway stones were heaved into place by forgotten hands in an age before Andals, before dragons, perhaps before men. Robb had argued Winterfell's granaries should feed Drogo's riders if the truce were to stand, so carts laden with rye and oatcakes rattled behind the Khalasar, each escorted by Karstark spearmen. The sight of northern grain wagons riding beneath horselord banners stirred fury in many a hearth hall, but no bannerman dared refuse the stark command after Torgon Karstark's head was nailed above his own gates for balking. Robb wept when he ordered the execution, then told no one of the tears save Catelyn. "War is a mill," his mother said, "and the innocent are the first grain it grinds." Daenerys traveled in a hide-lined palanquin, slung between two of the sturdiest destriers Lord Manderley could spare. Jaqui and Irri rode beside her, nursing charcoal braziers to keep the chill from her swollen belly. Rhaego kicked often now, angry at confinement. Each night she dreamed of a vast black mare running across a field of snow that cracked open to reveal red-gold light beneath, as if fire smoldered in the marrow of the world. In the dream, she followed the mare into the rift, and felt herself turn to flame without pain. She woke burning, yet ice clung to the inside of the tent like crystal scales. Ser Jorah prowled the camp like a restless shadow, his stolen Winterfell longsword, its fuller etched with weeping heart trees, never left his hip. The northern men gave him wary nods. Here was a Mormont in exile, but a Mormont still, and that meant something. Dothraki bloodriders followed him with their eyes the way wolves watch a bear. Not master and not prey but rival. Though sworn to Drogo, Jorah had grown used to speaking for both husband and wife when discord licked between their tents. Many times he defused quarrels over horseflesh, or mediated insults traded by tired tongues. He understood too well the speed with which desperation could ignite old scorn. The bogs before the neck swallowed the scouts, sent to find safe passage. One rider returned ice to the waist, having dragged himself over peat that swallowed his horse without a splash. Another galloped back at dusk, babbling of corpses nailed to weirwood stumps. Dead men, he swore. But their heads turned when he approached, and their mouths spilled storm-colored breath. That night, Khal Drogo bound torches to 50 arrow shafts and sent his swiftest riders to burn every weirwood within a league. Robb's protest died in his throat when another spear of rime took Jor Wells through the chest as he stood watch at the picket line. The white shaft melted to water once it spilled the boy's heart-blood, leaving Northman and Horselord alike staring at the wound with dumb horror. When at last the watchers on the wall sent word, 3 torn ravens arriving within hours of each other, feathers stiff with frostbite, Benjen Stark's warning appeared timid beside what those ragged parchments proclaimed. The night fort had fallen. Reanimated corpses poured south of the wall, through a breach of shattered ice. The watch strength at Castle Black stood but barely. Every man who could grip a sword was on the ramparts, or patrolling the haunted forest by torchlight. "Send fire and blades of dragonglass." The letter read in Jon Snow's cramped hand, ink cracking where it froze. "And pray the wall holds another moon." Terror spread through the camp like oil on water. The old Khalein crooned lullabies about salt shores and warm grasses, while Dothraki mothers clutched children whose lips were already tinted blue. Northern spearmen muttered of Craster's sons and the price of broken guest right. Even the horses felt the unease. They bit at reins, reared at stray snowflakes, rolled their eyes to show bloodshot whites. Several nights running, Grey Wind's howls were answered from far across the bogs by thin, cold voices no wolf throat could form. Still they pressed south, wading knee-deep through half-frozen mire, until the basalt towers of Moat Cailin rose before them. The stronghold had been abandoned after the conquest. Only 3 of its 20 towers remained whole, and even those leaned at warped angles. But the causeway was narrow, and the flanking bogs more treacherous than any moat. If Winter's armies of the dead meant to push into the green lands below, they would find Drogo's riders barring the throat of the world. The Khalasar lit great bonfires atop the towers, stacking peat and driftwood in pyres so tall their sparks swirled like stars against the northern dark. The heat was never enough, yet men felt braver beneath the orange glare. Ser Jorah supervised the digging of pits all along the causeway, wolf traps lined with dragonglass shards shipped from Eastwatch years ago when some lordling fancied himself a scholar of the Dawn Age. The shards pulsed black-green beneath torchlight, veins of volcanic fire captured in stone. Northern carpenters who once carved cradle toys now fashioned spearheads and arrowheads, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Each armful of obsidian shavings stoked new arguments. Who would wield this precious death? The Dothraki balked at weapons they did not trust. The free folk, guides sworn to Mance Rayder, offered to teach them. But Robb refused wildling help. In the end, women too frail for melee were taught. Catelyn herself knocked a dragonglass arrow and hit pitch-soaked straw on her 4th try. When the straw burst into green flame, she hissed a prayer. By the second moon of the truce, food stores ran low despite Winterfell's carts. The neck yielded little but lichen-crusted frogs and half-starved goats that wandered down from Flint's Finger. Drogo ordered hunting parties into the Wolfswood to the west, but wolves drove prey deeper every day. When a party returned with only 3 hairs and the severed arm of a tracker, Jicky began mixing horse and blood stew without shame. The Northmen gagged at the smell. The Dothraki drank with haunted eyes and said nothing. On the eve of the equinox, Daenerys went into labor as the Red Comet, long vanished from southern skies, appeared again, bleeding above the horizon. Snow fell in soft hush around the birthing tent. Old Sansa Ryswell, midwife to 3 generations of Barrow Kings, knelt between Daenerys' thighs, while Jicky chanted in Dothraki, and Eerie fed her crushed pine needle tea for the pain. The child came breech, shoulders broad as a young stallion's. A squall of wind battered the tent precisely as he slid into the world, as though the storm itself gasped. His cry cut the air. No babe ever sounded so fierce, the midwife would say later, like a war horn on the Frostfangs. They named him Rhaego Starcorsi, for in the old tongue of the Barrow Kings, the suffix meant wolf-born. Robb brought a Cairngorm brooch as gift, amber glow trapped in smoky quartz, and fastened it to the babe's swaddling. Drogo offered a mare's heart, but a living horse, not a slaughtered one. He held the foaling mare steady, while Daenerys guided her son to the teat, the child's fingers curling round, warm hide as though he already knew reins. Afterward Drogo whispered that the horse's life was bound to the boy's. Should one fall, the other would follow the same night. Daenerys saw trust and terror struggling behind her son and star's dark gaze. In that instant she understood. The Khal who had never feared anything now feared the world for his son. Snowmelt swelled the slow brown rivers of the neck, seeping into tower foundations. Ravens perched on every toppled battlement. Feathers puffed against sleet, black eyes reflecting bonfire sparks. Bran Stark, still at Winterfell, reached out through dream paths until he perched in those raven skins, seeing visions the waking world denied him. Inside, feather and bone, he felt an unease deeper than hunger or cold, a thrumming in the earth itself, like heartbeats shifting in buried giants. He told Maester Luwin the stone spoke beneath the moat. The Maester chalked it to fever visions, but at night Bran's direwolf Summer threw back his head and sang to the dark, as though answering faraway drums. When the others struck, they flowed from the bogs in silence, frost-bitten reeds bending where their shadows passed. The first sentries died without time for screams. Only the shrill of shattering steel alerted the camp. Jorah vaulted from sleep onto frozen ground, sword already drawn. In the torch glare, he saw mists moving that were also men, blades of hoarfrost glimmering at their edges. Arrows whistled. Some fell harmless where they lodged in rime armor, but those tipped in dragonglass cracked the first ranks like china. Instead of blood, powdery rime billowed from wounds, sparkling under firelight before settling over snow like ghostly pollen. Drogo's blood riders mounted even as whites clawed onto saddles, black fingers snapping reins. Horses shrieked. One stallion reared so high it spilled 2 undead riders into a pit, where obsidian stakes impaled them and erupted in pale flame. But the gap in the line let more pour through. Screams rose from the northern flank as Lady Maya Stone, Robert Baratheon's bastard visiting to parley for the crown, was hewn at the waist by a frost axe. Her 2 halves slid apart like halves of a butchered hog, eyes still wide, moment before her corpse jerked upright anew. The children of the forest arrived unlooked for. They came crawling out of the peat mounds, Small as Bran's story said, skin as green-gray as old willow bark. They brought no fire, wielding only obsidian blades that flickered with the memory of volcanic fury. They fell upon whites with shrill war cries, carving runes in the snow. For every child struck down 3 rose in its place, bright sap splattering the white field like emeralds in the snow. But they fought on, ignoring their losses without tear or tremor. Their chief, a dire-eyed elder named Leaf, pressed a black crystal to the ice where an other's foot had passed. The ground screamed like boiling water, and steam coiled skyward, carrying shapes of weeping women. Robb watched in awe until a white bear barreled into his blind side. Gray Wind's leap saved him again, but the wolf's shoulder ripped open under the bear's dead weight. Daenerys fled with Rhaego clutched to her breast, Jiqui at her shoulder. They reached the central tower, the only one with a door stout enough to bar, just as Agos staggered in, eyes wild. "Khaleesi," he hissed, "we must take the boy south. These stones bleed poison." She shook, unable to distinguish sweat from melting snow, and ordered him to gather 6 riders, the healthiest mares, enough dried meat for a fortnight. They would slip down the causeway's far end while the battle raged. She hoped Drogo would forgive the flight. No. The Khal could follow or not. Only the child mattered now. Outside, the causeway path had become a killing ground. Pits flared emerald, where obsidian ignited undead flesh, but the gaps between pits bristled with corpses that would not stay dead. Leaf and 2 remaining children spilled black powder that burst into blue flame when another's blade brushed it. The explosion lit the bog like false dawn. Men cheered, until the pieces of the shattered other crawled back together, ice fusing flesh, and rose again renewed. Jorah swore an oath in Valyrian, older than old Valyria. "The fire is not hot enough," he roared, cutting through rising whites. "We need dragon fire." Drogo heard him and remembered the pyres on the distant Dothraki Sea, when a pale princess walked through flame and returned unburnt. He turned his gaze south, toward the tower where Daenerys sheltered. Then he bared his teeth and carved a path through whites, heading not for her, but for the storehouses where barrels of lamp oil sat stacked. 2 bloodriders followed, hacking instead of asking. They rolled barrels to the ramparts, split them with axes, and let the reeking black flood pour into the bog's reeds. The wind turned, fanning fumes across advancing whites. Drogo snatched a torch and flung it. Fire flashed white for an eye blink, then roared sky-high, a wall of crimson and gold that danced on oil-slick water. Where flame touched undead flesh, frost shattered. 1,000 screams rose, brittle as icicles snapping. The others retreated, cloaked in whirling snow that hissed each time flame brushed its edge. For a heartbeat hope blazed as bright as the fire, but wind shifted again. The conflagration licked upward, found nothing more to burn, and guttered. The bog drank the fuel greedily. Flame flickered, thinned, died. Pregnant silence fell heavy enough to crush a man's breath. Through lifting smoke walked something larger than any man, a horned figure wrought of rime and anguish, eyes blue coals veiled by drifting snow. Its armor flowed like liquid ice. In its hand, a spear of crystal captured moonlight. Behind it glided a cabal of others, no more than 6, yet each emanating a presence that gnawed at the marrow of living men. When the laid creature lowered its spear, the blizzard itself seemed to bend to its will, funnels of snow ripping forward like 1,000 white serpents. Fires died. Men screamed as frost-shrouded weapons turned them brittle, and blades snapped in their hands. Gray Wind charged the horned other with a bellow fit for the kings of winter. The spear flicked, so quick it might have been sleight of hand, and the direwolf's charge halted mid-stride. Ice stiffened across his pelt, creeping inward. Robb shouted and hurled himself at the other, but a lesser white intercepted him, once Theon Greyjoy, now blue-eyed and lipless. They grappled, each man's breath steaming. Robb remembered Theon from boyhood hunts across the greenwood, remembered laughter on summer evenings. He buried a dragonglass dagger in the thing's throat. Hot tears froze on his lashes. The ground bucked beneath Drogo's feet. From the smoke behind him, Leaf emerged dragging something bound in swaddling bandages of sodden bark. 3 small eggs mottled cream and onyx and vein red. Fire's breath in stone, Leaf croaked, pressing them into Drogo's arms. Blood of the dragon, blood of the forest. Seed of the living flame, break them. The Khal stared, uncomprehending. Leaf seized his wrist, drew dragonglass across his palm. Black blood and red mingled on Drogo's skin. She smeared the blood across the eggs, intoning words that sounded like wind through cracks in ancient trunks. A spark glimmered beneath the shell of the largest egg. Drogo felt heat like forge fire through bearskin and chain. On the ramparts, Ago's horn sounded. Riders approached the southern causeway. Torches bobbed. Northerners. Wildlings. Traitors? No, those. Black cloaks, white frosting their shoulders. The Night's Watch, led by Jon Snow on a shaggy Garin whose nostrils blew steam. Behind him marched Mance Rayder's free folk, clans of then and horn-footed men and spearwives in crow feathers, carrying barrels of something that sloshed like liquid night. Wildfire, Jon shouted over distance, voice cracking under exhaustion. He waved a torch. Drogo barely heard. The eggs throbbed in his arms like hatching hearts. He roared, smashing one upon the basalt battlement. The shell fractured. Green-yellow flame geysered upward, coiling with smoke that smelled of cinnamon and copper. The blaze bent toward his bloodied hand as though hungry. Drogo laughed, a raw, ripping sound, and hurled the second egg into the blotch of wildfire spreading from Jon's barrels as Watch Brothers rolled them into the bog. Green flame met red. The mixture birthed a shrieking column of color, neither fully green nor red, a volatile alchemy that sang in the language of creation. Snowflakes caught in that rising heat vaporized to steam. The horned other paused, spear lowering fractionally. For the first time, those blue eyes revealed uncertainty. Leaf danced forward, seizing the third egg from Drogo's grip. She flung it high above the causeway. Ago followed with his last torch, slinging it end over end. The torch struck the tumbling egg midair. Shell shards burst like knives of opal, and through them exploded wings of darkest crimson, lined in molten gold. A newborn dragon shrieked, tiny but fierce, trailing umbilical ember as it beat. Newborn wings once, twice, and caught a thermal rising from wildfire below. Soot and storm winds swirled across its scale-bright hide. The horned other stepped back. The hatchling banked overhead, instincts older than glass or iron guiding it toward the thing that threatened its mother flame. A gout of orange fire poured from the dragon's throat. The wash struck the spear of ice. Crystal shrieked. The spear melted at its core, collapsing into refracting waterfall. The dragon circled, shrieked again, and dove through smoke to bathe lesser whites in cleansing fire. Wherever its breath touched, corpses ignited, burning white at first, then collapsing into puddles of water and bone ash. Robb Stark, freed by Jorah's intercession, knelt over Grey Wind's stiff form. The direwolf's eyes were half ice, but breath lingered in his chest. Robb pressed a dragonglass shard to the frost creeping over ribs. The shard glowed, and the ice receded like a tide. Grey Wind twitched, gasped, then snarled weakly. Robb laughed for the first time since his wounding. He rose, blood smeared, and shouted for every man to gather fallen torches. "Light them from dragonfire," he commanded. "No ice can stand against living flame." Jon Snow and the Night's Watch crashed into the main fight then, wildlings at their rear. Their faces were half hidden behind scarves soaked in pine tar to ward chill. They wielded crude dragonglass axes, blades bound in bone. Tormund Giantsbane barreled into a mound of whites, laughing as if at feast, while Val the spearwife spun 2 obsidian daggers in silver arcs that left afterimages of firelight. The horned other retreated toward the bog, cloak spreading behind like raven wings. Leaf darted forward, palm slapping rough runes into the snow, while chanting in a voice pitched between child and tempest. The marsh trembled. Cracks opened like mouths and exhaled vents of methane. Wildfire had seeped into those pockets. A spark drifted from the newborn dragon's tail and vanished into a crack. With a roar deep as the world's belly, the marsh erupted, a sheet of blue-green flame chased by concussive blast. Heat ripped up reeds, hurled men from their feet, splashed across the horned otter's silver armor. Where flame clung, ice hissed, turning to black water that steamed amid the snow. The other's spearless fist clenched. The creature wailed, a sound of glaciers calving. Its form went liquid, limbs deforming into a storm of shards that blew west on a sudden wind. The army of whites stuttered, stiffened, and collapsed like puppets with strings cut. Silence fell, broken only by a crackle of dying wildfire and the newborn dragon's ragged breathing. Its wings beat once more, uncertain, before it settled atop Moat Caelan's tallest tower, claws carving gouges in ancient basalt. Smoke curled from its nostrils in lazy spirals. The survivors staggered from wreckage. Many wept. Some laughed hysterically. Some only stared, too spent for tears or mirth. Drogo strode through them, braids crisp at the ends by fire, chest cut in a dozen places where ice fragments had scored skin. He climbed the tower stair by leaps, ignoring wounds, until he stood before the little dragon. For a moment nothing moved but flickers of ember rolling over scale. Then the hatchling stretched its neck and touched its snout to Drogo's burned palm. Flame licked between them, but did not hurt. Drogo closed blackened fingers around the fragile jaw, meeting eyes bright as comet steel. Vaeshof, he whispered, the Dothraki word for stormborn. Below, Daenerys appeared at the base of the tower, Rhaego bundled in black. She looked up and saw her sun and stars bathed in glow from their child of fire. Her heart hammered louder than any battle. She began to climb. The Night's Watch tended their wounded, and wildlings guarded the perimeter, though most foes lay dead, or lifeless again. But Leaf remained crouched over the shattered bog where the horned other had dispersed. She dug bare fingers into the mud, feeling something none could see. Bran felt it hundreds of miles away, a void rent in the veil between life and silence, magnetic, unfinished. The war for Dawn had not ended. It had only tasted a first true blood. Robb Stark limped to Jon's side. Brothers embraced despite layers of sweat-soaked fur and iron. "We hold the neck," Robb said, voice hoarse. "But winter still comes." Jon nodded. His eyes tracked the newborn dragon tracing lazy circles above the tower where Drogo and Daenerys now stood together. "Perhaps fire comes too," he murmured. Catelyn watched her sons against a black horizon split by drifting embers. She felt awe and dread, and something like fragile hope. Sansa comforted women who mourned kin, singing hymns to the Seven, though her voice cracked. Arya helped Leaf gather the obsidian shards of broken blades. The child showed her how to shape slivers into arrowheads, and Arya's grin could have cut iron. That night, with wind fallen to whisper, they burned the corpses of friend and foe alike on pyres dripping wildfire. Green-blue tongues spiraled into stars. Leaf and her kin sang in words few living had ever heard, each note a shard of the first dawn. Drogo stood before the flames, newborn dragon perched upon his shoulder, and raised Rhaego high so the child's face was limned in living fire. The assembled Northmen knelt as one, a sea of bent heads. Khalazar riders beat fists against their chests. Even the wildlings bowed, though none would later admit. Daenerys Targaryen Stark-Corsi, mother of a dragon and queen of a people without grass, placed her hand upon her husband's heart and spoke in the common tongue so all could understand. "The long night is not done," she said. "But tonight, the fire remembers how to burn." Ravens carried the tale south and east. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister scoffed at rumors of ice demons and horse lords, then drank a goblet of wine until her lips were purple with fear. In Old Town, the archmaesters argued over aged texts smelling of dust and inevitability. In Qarth, the warlocks lit azure flames atop the House of the Undying and stared westward with blind white eyes. Across the narrow sea, slaves in Meereen dreamed of a silver dragon queen and tasted hope for the first time beneath cracked lips. And in far Ashai, a red woman gazed into a mirror of obsidian and saw a Khal with eyes of night holding a son who shone like morning. At Moat Caelan, they rebuilt. Wooden palisades rose around basalt ruins. Trenches filled with black water and shards. Watchtowers were crowned with iron braziers fed day and night. Snow yet fell, but beneath it glowed embers of unyielding flame. Riders patrolled north, south, east, and west. Traders' wagons arriving under truce flag to exchange dried fruit, salt pork, and spices for unknown treasures. Rings carved from dragon glass, wolf pelts cured in dragon warmth. Nuggets of a red ore that sang when struck. The dragon, now the size of a large hound, took to roosting on the highest rampart, shrieking whenever new snow drifted near its nest of charred wood. They named him Morghulis, for death had birthed him. His breath melted arrow slits wider, but no mason scolded. They only widened each breach, shaping embrasures for archers. Leaf taught Bran, through dream paths, the art of weaving wood songs into stone, so that roots and grain would knit broken walls. Under her guidance, Robb's lame leg strengthened until he walked without crutch, though a white line of scar still puckered his thigh. Jon Snow took command of a mixed host. Night's Watch veterans, free folk raiders, and Dothraki scouts, patrolling the eastern marches. They found more signs of others. Circles of melted snow around toppled trees, animals frozen mid-stride. Yet none dared attack since the burning of the horned spear-bearer. The forest breathed, wary, waiting. Drogo trained with great swords now, finding curved araks ill-suited to ice. He sparred with Tormund, with Jorah, even with Grachan Umber's younger brother Harrion, whose laughter echoed Drogo's own like twin thunder. The Khal's pride no longer lay in horse alone, but in the melding of traditions. Leather sewn with northern mail, braids woven with tiny obsidian shards that clacked like beads. His riders began to sing war songs in guttural North Manish, their accents crooked but proud. Daenerys nursed Rhaego by dragonfire, so the boy's face glowed golden. She wrote letters to Illyrio, to the Prince of Dorne, to the Tyrell Queen of Highgarden, inviting alliance against the true enemy creeping from myth. No raven returned save one from Dorne, an orange ribbon tied to its leg, bearing only 3 words: fire and blood. Summer gave way to an autumn that felt like spring beside what had been. The rivers unfroze just enough for fish traps. Moss bloomed gray-green on northern trees. Women planted seeds saved from kitchens, though none knew if they would sprout. One dawn Bran warged into a raven and soared far north to the broken wall. He saw a lake where icebergs calved into water black as widow's glass. Shapes stirred beneath its surface, things that glimmered like drowned stars. He withdrew, heart hammering. The others were not halted. They simply mended. At council that evening, Bran spoke through Maester Luwin. "The dragon is but one," he warned. 3 heads there must be. His words rippled around the firelit hall. Drogo's brow furrowed. Daenerys felt phantom shells beneath her palms. Leaf nodded, though no one spoke her language. Jorah fetched the half-burned saddlebags taken from Leaf that night of Dragon's birth. Within lay 5 more eggs, hairline fractures veining shells like living lightning. They glimmered faintly in torch glow, warm as breath against frost-numbed skin. Robb Stark stepped forward, laid his calloused palm to a blue-black egg streaked with silver. "Winter wolves need winter flame," he said. Jon Snow placed his gloved hand over a pale gold egg, speckled red. "For the wall," he vowed. Catelyn reached trembling fingers toward a milk-white shell veined rose, but withdrew. Instead, Arya slammed her hand atop it with fierce grin. "Why let boys have all the fire?" she asked, voice bright as drawn steel. Even Sansa dared touch a lavender-flecked egg, though her hand shook so violently she bit her lip until it bled. The last egg, green dark as pine shadow, Daenerys lifted herself. "For Rhaego," she whispered. The eggs purred. Leaf sang words that made torches flicker blue. Bran's wolf howled beyond the wall of the hall. Morghulis spread wings, beat them once, twice, until sparks rained. Drogo drew his sword and carved a thin line across his forearm. Robb mirrored him. Jon, Arya, even Sansa followed. Blood hissed on hot shell. Flame burst, not outward but inward, through stone pores into dark marrow. Light pulsed like heartbeats of newborn worlds. Shadows flickered on walls carved thousands of years before into sigils of direwolf, weirwood, and dragon entwined. In a single breath, the tower hall became day. 6 dragon cries split the air, chords stacked in impossible harmony. Green and blue and gold and white and lavender wings unfurled in a storm of radiant chaos. They were small, no larger than falcons, but fire already glimmered beneath translucent throats. Morgulus circled above, trilling greeting. Daenerys laughed, chest aching with wonder. Drogo threw back his head and roared until the beams shook. Jon Snow felt tears scald eyes as winter's chill fled before newborn furnaces. Leaf spoke in the language of stone and seed. Luwin translated haltingly. When the breaking came, fire and ice were forged to end the darkness. But fire forgot, and ice grew proud. Now both remember. Nay. So began the second pact, signed in blood and flame beneath the broken towers of Moat Cailin. Stark and Targaryen, child and wildling, watch and Khalasar. The parchment was made of sheared dragon scale. The ink, a mixture of men's blood and sap of weirwood. They pledged not merely to defend the realms of men, but to mend them, to burn old hatreds like so much bog-reed feed. Years later, singers would call that night the dawn within shadow, the hour the world's spine bent away from ending. Yet, in the hush just after, as new dragons coiled round newborn destinies, Bran felt tremor still in the earth. The footfall of giants turned in restless dream. The others would come again, with colder cunning and deeper malice. But when they did, the north would answer not with lone torches in black night, but with wings of living flame. Above shattered Moat Cailin, 7 dragons chased sunrise across a lavender sky, and their shadows printed a promise on the snow. Winter might still come, but it would never find the world unlit again. The night air in King's Landing stank of tallow smoke and stale wine, yet the small council chamber glowed with the clean light of 100 scented candles. They could not quite mask the fug of fear wafting up from the city's lower streets, but Grand Maester Pycelle inhaled theatrically and called it cedar. Cersei ignored him. She had spent the day pacing the Tower of the Hand in a rage that left raw patches on the fine soles of her slippers. Now she sat very still, as if motion alone might betray panic. A tattered black raven's feather lay on the table between her and the maester, its barbs stiff with hoarfrost that refused to melt even beside open flame. Varys claimed the bird had fallen dead from the sky over the stepstones. Its talons clamped around a parchment strip reading fire remembers how to burn. Children's tales, the queen said at last, though the frost stung her fingers when she pushed the feather back toward Pycelle. If winter wishes to murder northern peasants, let it. But the words tasted like iron. Across the table, Petyr Baelish smiled around a goblet of Myrish red. If the tales prove true, he murmured, peasants will be the least of winter's appetites. Walls of ice have cracked before your grace. Gold cannot plaster that breach. His smile was polite, almost tender, but the candlelight in his eyes looked hungry. Far to the north, a different council met inside the basalt throat of Moat Cailin's tallest tower. Steam billowed from iron braziers and mingled with dragon smoke that coiled from rafters where Morgullis and his 6 younger siblings clung like living gargoyles. Every beat of their wings rattled icicles loose from the beams. Khal Drogo stood bare-armed beside a crude map scratched into a long trestle table. The wall is an uneven white gash, the bog-choked neck. The king's road a chalk thread vanishing toward painted ambers that marked the riverlands. Robb Stark leaned on the table's far side, gray eyes bright above the white wolf fur slung from one shoulder. Beside him, Jon Snow listened, silent but intent, fingers drumming the pommel of Longclaw. Daenerys watched them both. Her son strapped against her breast with wool bands dyed the crimson of Valyrian sails. When she shifted, Rhaego's dark eyes followed the dragons overhead instead of the men. 2 fronts, Robb said, stabbing a birchwood pointer at the table. The dead mass east of the Shadow Tower and west of Frostfangs. One of those armies means to flank our causeway and pour south through the Tallheart Hills. Drogo grunted. Let them. Grass or stone. A Khal spares no wind when his prey runs. But Jon shook his head. They don't run, they spread. Like rot, like night. We need more than riders. We need fire in their path. Daenerys placed a hand on Drogo's wrist before heat rose in his glare. Fire we have, she reminded them, lifting her chin toward the rafters where Morgulus unfurled a wing the color of blood, seen through ember. What we lack is sword steel, the flame can follow, and glass that remembers volcanoes. At first light, a column rode south. Stark bowmen, Dothraki Kopeshmen, and a dozen sworn brothers of the Night's Watch. Jon led them toward Dragonstone, 400 leagues away, where miners still chipped black glass from the old tunnels of the mount. With him rode Arya, insisting her dragon Naelora perched better on her shoulder than in any muse, and Ser Jorah, wearing a breastplate hammered from overlapping northern plates and Dothraki horse-stamped discs. The Khal dinned war honors onto Jon's arm by striking hot bronze against skin until scars formed new runes beneath the wool. Robb clasped his half-brother's good leg and whispered words that sounded suspiciously like an older promise to bring him home. They left as snow began again, fine eddies that danced on dragon's wing drafts. By dusk the South March road swallowed them whole. Leaf watched them fade, eyes like chips of river stone. The child of the forest had taken to carving faces inside the towers supporting beams, little grotesques that drooled sap. Bran Stark stepped within one dusk to find her working a knife no longer than his thumb. Wood remembers, she told him, carving pupils into a face that looked a little like his. In winter, it forgets slower than men. Bran, bound to his sledge-chair, pressed his palm to the fresh cut. He felt warmth pulse beneath bark, the slow heartbeat of a living tree, even though the timber had been felled a century. In dreams that night he flew south, following Jon's party until snow thinned, until pines gave way to ancient oaks, and the scent of brine carried the promise of storm's end. Somewhere beyond those cliffs a great furnace of sleeping fire throbbed in answer to his own heart. The vision dissolved when distant screams cracked the dark above moatside camps. An Ironborn raid came first. Balon Greyjoy had scented chaos like blood in water, and loosed reavers from Deepwood Motte all the way to the Flint Cliffs. War galleys slipped up rivers choked with ice flows, their hulls greased in rendered whale fat to slide below watchfires. One such ship beached against the causeway's western skirt as dawn bled pink across clouds. Iron men in squid ink mail spilled over the gunwale. They expected half-starved bog folk. Instead they met a Khalasar outrider troop led by Aggo and 70 ghost-faced North women armed with obsidian-tipped pikes. Within heartbeats, the snow ran black with squid ink and red with blood. One Ironborn threw down his axe, begging guest right in the name of the drowned god. His plea ended when Arya's dragon dropped from mist and seared him head to heel. Aggo quartered the corpse anyway. By sundown the Ironborn longship burned in the bog, its mast a torch to warn other reavers steering blind. News of that defense rode south faster than ravens. In the parchments outside Highgarden, Olenna Tyrell swore at a perfumed cousin for dithering, and dispatched 2,000 green-cloaked archers north under Sir Brynden Tully's banner. Summer may sleep, she declared, but roses remember how to prick. In Sunspear, Prince Doran rolled open Daenerys' parchment again, and traced the words fire and blood with a tremoring finger. He ordered 4 sand ships loaded with citrus and dragon-glass daggers to sail along the eastern coast, hugging every inlet where white armies could not yet freeze the shallows. The Dornish captains painted wyvern wings on their sails, so watchers might think dragons already ruled the seas. Inside the Red Keep, rage festered. Cersei slapped Jaime's stump when he tried to calm her, then wept until the gold in his beard stained with her kohl. "They will march south," she whispered, as if dragons already beat against the gatehouse. "They will come for my children." "No," Jaime murmured, though Tommen's cheeks had already lost their summer plumpness, and Myrcella's septa-claimed strange dreams left her half awake by dawn. Pycelle babbled about hidden wildfire caches the Mad King had stashed beneath the city. Burn them all echoing in corridors no one dared sweep. Varys vanished for 3 full days. When at last he returned, he whispered that half the Alchemists' Guild had followed him into the Black Cell tunnels, carrying flasks corked with septon wax. Only 1 in 10 returned alive, their eyes gleaming weird green in torchlight. They reported ghost flames stirring behind locked sepstone doors, waiting to devour a kingdom from below. Beyond the neck, the war turned elemental. The eastern host of the dead advanced by forging their own road. They froze swamps solid in hours, marched across mirror-bright sheets of ice, then let the thaw swallow any pursuers. Robb lost a company of Karstarks that way, men who chased too close and drowned screaming beneath cracking white. He responded by ordering sawyers to fell entire stands of pine across the frozen surfaces overnight. Come dawn, the others met a maze of trunks iced in place, each trunk smeared with tar and tinder. When Morghulis swept low and set them alight, pillars of charred resin stuck blazing fangs through the mirror world. Scores of whites collapsed into meltwater too thick with ash to refreeze. But the western flank became Drogo's proving ground. He took 700 riders, each wearing lamellar over iron spine coats, and drove through snows so high the horses vanished up to the withers. Flaming arrows marked their path. The sky glowed strange green where dragonfire touched the horizon. On the 6th night they reached Barrow Hole, or what was left of it. Ice demons had pulled stone from earth as if uprooting teeth. In the shattered crypts below, Drogo found sarcophagi cracked open from within, bones missing. He ordered every chamber flooded with pitch, and torched them until sparks shot like fireflies through the black gape. The roof caved. The barrow collapse sent tremors rumbling miles seaward. 10 heartbeats later, the white mists around the ruins screamed, as if some buried choir of ghosts had been set alight. Fever and frostbite claimed riders faster than spears. In one tent, a healer sliced toes from 8 men while chanting Dothraki prayers. In another, Robert Glover's squire slit his own wrists after his sword, shattered to powder against a single ice white. Drogo watched all impassively until even his braids sagged under icicles. That night, beneath curtains of green aurora, he walked alone to a ridge and shouted into wind so cold it razored the lungs. He dared the great stallion to show which path led to victory. No voice answered, only the flicker of dawn far to the south, where his wife's dragons circled in restless arcs above Moat Cailin. Yet when Drogo returned to camp, his eyes held a new fire, black and shining. He commanded a retreat then, but not to the neck. Instead, he steered his riders west toward the old sea cliffs where gulls had long since fled. There, at the foot of the ragged coastline, slabs of jet-black rock thrust like broken knives from the surf. Drogo ordered pickaxes. It took a moon's turning. Pick after pick shattered against the stone. Some said the rock bled sparks like red rubies, others that it bled shadows darker than pitch. But eventually, a chunk the size of an aurochs bull tumbled free and split along unseen seams, revealing glittering veins of obsidian shot through with filaments of silver. Drogo named the place the Stallion's Hoof and ordered sled teams to haul jagged blocks inland, enough to arm a city. When word reached Moat Cailin, Bran felt the ground hum under his chair. Leaf placed her small hand on his cheek and whispered that the world forged such glass only in the hour before it breaks. Jon's mission reached Dragonstone, amidst political mire thicker than any bog. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself rightful king again, breath frosting his beard as he lectured Jon on treason cloaked in direwolves. But when Naelora glided down and perched on the painted table, the would-be king lost his tongue. Ser Davos, ever practical, offered the keys to the Dragonglass caverns on condition the new dragons defend the shipping lanes from ironborn pirates. Arya spat. She'd roast any squid without charters. Davos thought it a binding contract, scribbled it with a broken quill, and led them down torchlit stairs into the belly of a volcano, older than recorded time. There Jon found galleries lined with glittering black. Some veins pulsed orange where molten rivers flowed beneath. The Watch brothers gasped. One tried to chip a sliver and the rock split under its own weight, hissing steam that smelled of cinnamon and grave earth. They worked by shifts, filling wagons until wagons broke axles. Davos suggested shipping by sea, but Arya's dragon shrieked at sailcloth like a cat at water. In the end, they forged long rafts, lashed them to teams of garrons, and hauled cargo up the King's Road under banners of wolf and stag and seahorse. It was the first time in memory those sigils had moved in company without drawing steel. In their absence, Sansa Stark discovered her voice. Catelyn had sent her to treat with House Reed, hoping Jojen's green dreams might align with Bran's. But at Greywater Watch, Sansa found the Crannogmen besieged by a host of fogwhites. She rode in with only 20 spears, yet sang an old hearth song in Valyrian. something her septa taught for courtly grace, and the whites halted, as if struck deaf. Mira Reed loosed a frog spear, pinning one white through the ice-webbed throat, and the thing collapsed. Another spear, and another song note. By dawn, every corpse lay still. How or why no maester could say, but the Reeds crowned Sansa shield maiden of the neck, gifting her a cuirass inset with mirror shards to blind the dead with reflected dawnlight. The tale traveled south on the same bird that carried Catelyn news of Balon Greyjoy's drowning, washed off the steps of Lordsport by a rogue wave under a calm sky. Some whispered the drowned god had recalled his chosen. Some said Morgulus' shadow, sweeping over Pike at sunset, had driven squall winds that crushed the Kraken King. Winter deepened. Wolves grew bolder, prowling camps at dusk. Robb refused to let scouts cull them. He believed the wolves served as early warning, their noses keener than any man's. Leaf agreed, telling of an age when direwolves guided the first men through ice labyrinths. In secret chambers beneath Moat Cailin, she and Bran carved runes onto shards of old weirwood root. They pressed those into wound grooves along Robb's scarred leg. The next morning Robb walked without limp, though faint tracks of white fur seemed to follow each step and melted only slowly behind. All the while the others watched. Sometimes in the witch hour torches on distant ridges guttered out, and pale figures flickered like candle flames born of frost. Scouts found no footprints, only snow grains fused into glassy crust, shaped like silhouettes, each brittle as sugar. Maester Luwin took some into his brazier, and the silhouettes melted to oily puddles that smelled of eclipsed moons. At last, on the eve of the winter solstice, the dead attacked again. This time not in ragged waves, but as armies disciplined and silent. 2 columns materialized just after moonrise, one from the shattered East Road forts, one from drowned barrows north by northwest. Between them lay the neck, and within the neck 7 dragons roosting. Robb mustered every spear, every bow, every obsidian shard. Drogo mounted his stallion Fury Breath, armor crusted in frozen sweat, and wove flaming arrows through his braid. Jon rode in with the first wagon trains from Dragonstone, each cart gleaming obsidian. Stannis himself commanded the rear guard, having sailed up the White Knife on sleek black galleys and marched inland by torchlight. Davos wore a dragonglass hand on the wrist, had lost years earlier, believing luck balanced in opposites. Cersei sent no help, but Tyrion Lannister came of his own volition, 2 kegs of wildfire rolling behind a donkey he called Brimstone. Dragons burn bright, he told Catelyn, but wildfire burns rude. Sometimes rudeness wins wars. Snow fell, not flakes, but tiny needles that pricked and drew blood. They coated shields red before battle joined. As dawn threatened behind Bruised Cloud, a horn like nothing born of wood or man bellowed across the ice fields, deep, flanging, echoing inside bone marrow. The others advanced. At their fore strode 6 figures in cracked mirror armor. One clutched a staff grown from glacial coral, twisting with imprisoned screams. The ground frost bloomed under every step. They walked atop snow as lightly as herons on lily pads. Dragons struck first. Morgulus dived, unleashing a white-hot torrent that birthed instant steam walls. Naelora followed, her breath paler, tinged lavender, searing armor so swift it hairline fractured like eggshell. The leading other thrust his coral staff, and a fan of frost deflected flame, forcing Naelora to wheel skyward, shrieking. Behind them smaller dragons darted, weaving jets that traced fiery runes above the host's center. Whites exploded where fire kissed, pockets voided in their ranks like teeth knocked from skulls. But gaps filled quickly. Some corpses flowed back together like spilled wax, reformed by cold. Stannis directed columns to hammer each flank. Dornish spears glittered obsidian black as the sky. Tyrell archers' loose shafts fletched with white goose feathers dipped in wildfire tar. Where the arrows stuck they flared green, wreathing whites in unnatural light. Even so, momentum favored the dead. For every 10 corpses felled, 11 clambered over them. The moans grew into a tidal dirge that drowned, shouted commands. Knights from Storm's End charged, blades blazing with pitch, and vanished beneath a heaving mass of claws. Horses reared, screaming. Eyes rhined white. The line buckled. Bran felt the weight buckling long before steel failed. Inside the tower he convulsed, green dream light flooding his sight. He reached for roots beneath the moat, for sap veins older than winter. Leaf placed both palms on his temples and poured a song of the dawn into his ears. Bran fell into the song, down, through stone and soil, into a web of roots beating like hearts. He begged the wood to wake, and the wood answered. The land itself rose. Around the moat's circumference, ancient black willows shuddered off snow and cracked their own trunks open like jaws. From inside poured sap thick and gold, glowing with captive sunlight older than men. The sap streamed into the air, then rained onto the advancing whites as droplets that burst into white fire hotter than dragon flame. Whites melted as if hurled into lime pits. Others cried out, a sound like icebergs grinding and frost shields shattered under golden rain. Where sap touched the ground, grass sprouted, briefly green blades trembling before the cold reclaimed them, but long enough to hiss against undead feet. Drogo seized the moment. He spurred fury breath, leading his blood riders and northern cavalry into the breach. They wielded lances tipped with obsidian soaked in wildfire. Each thrust left smoking cavities and corpses that collapsed in rows. Jon rode beside him, Longclaw's Valyrian edge reddening with fire runes each time it parted an icy neck. Robb's direwolf armor shone pale, reflecting dawn breaking behind him as he cut a path to the coral-staffed other. They clashed under a sky striping pink and ash. The Uther's staff swept wide, freezing the air itself so shards of diamond sleet slashed the men behind Robb. But gray wind appeared as if from nowhere, flanks slicked crimson, and bit deep into that frost-woven limb. The staff snapped. Blue fire spilled from the break, and the other howled. Tyrion's donkey plodded forward in the chaos. He uncorked one keg of wildfire, stuffed in a dragon-glass dagger, and yelled at a passing Karstark to throw. The man hesitated, until Naelora swooped, spraying flame that parted whites like wheat. The Karstark hurled. The keg shattered in midair when an other's ice lance pierced it. Green storm blossomed. For a heartbeat all sound ceased. Wind sucked inward, and then the blast rolled across the ice plain, a drake of living jade, swallowing 1,000 dead in a single breath. Tyrion patted the donkey. "Good, Brimstone," he said, reaching for the next keg. The battle lasted the length of a northern winter dawn. Hours where sun crawled up a blade's edge but never quite cleared cloud. Blood-soaked ice thicker than any spring flood. When at last the moans fell to silence and only wind howled, the field lay carpeted in ash, melted slush, and shards of glittering crystal that steamed where sunlight touched them. 6 craters marked where 6 others had fallen. In the center of each crater glowed a pool of sap gold still too hot to approach. Losses cut deep. Half of Stannis' knights lay dead or maimed. Mance raiders' spearwives limped, carrying children who had joined the shield wall. 2 dragons bore scorches along scale where ice spears grazed them. Yet the line held. The neck did not break. At sunset, when survivors gathered by the biggest pyre, Daenerys stepped forward with Rhaego in her arms. She spoke of the first pact and the second, of roots that remembered, a fire taken from the heart of the world, and returned at need. As she spoke, the dragons lifted their voices, a 7-fold cord rolling across frozen marsh into distant hills. Men uncovered ears in awe. Some wept. Even hardened Khalasar warriors bowed until their braids trailed snow. That night, Bran dreamed one last dream. He perched above the wall, high as a cloud wraith, and watched the northern sky writhe with ribbons of red and emerald. Below, gaps yawned where ice once reached mountains. Rivers of black water flowed south, carrying shards of blue glass. Something vast moved beneath those waters, its eyes 2 drowned stars. But when it looked up, it saw fire mirrored back from the next pyres, and it blinked first. Bran woke with tears frozen on his cheeks, but hope warm in his chest. The victory did not end the war, yet it changed its rhythm. From that night onward, the others retreated beyond the frost fangs. They nursed whatever wounds immortal things could know, gathering power in silence. And humanity, for the first time in a generation, dared breathe between heartbeats. Joan's dragons grew large enough that their wing beats generated heat mirages over snowfields. Sansa trained companies of mirror male maidens called dawn spears, their shields inlaid with polished moons. Tyrion brewed new wildfire strains that burned sky blue and left fertile loam instead of ash. Leaf's children coaxed seeds to sprout from ice itself, creating rings of living green that repelled whites as surely as trenches of fire. In the midst of that fragile dawn, Khal Drogo bowed before the heart tree Bran had raised atop Moat Caelin's highest mound. The carved face wept golden sap that gleamed like melted dawn. Drogo pressed his braids against the trunk and swore to ride until the sun set in places where no sun rose, if that was what it took to shatter night forever. Bran, listening through the roots, understood. The world's axis had tilted. It no longer turned on Southron thrones or iron crowns, but on a boy in a chair, a horse lord born in grass but forged in snow, and a girl who carried dawnlight in her blood. Winter was not broken, nor was it gone, but it had found a match worthy of its chill. A people set ablaze, a pact written in sap and soul. 7 dragons fledged under a sky that now knew their names. And somewhere far beyond the frozen edge, where the sea itself slept under miles-thick ice, a horned king of death cradled the memory of sapphire burning through his veins. His scream echoed under glaciers, and the world shivered. Yet flames danced still on the neck, and every heartbeat inside Moat Caelin answered, "Yes, yes, yes, fire remembers." It began with silence so profound that even the dragons folded their wings in quiet. Dawn seeped from the east like watered wine, paling the scorched wreckage where 2 armies had broken each other on sapphire and steel. Survivors moved through drifting steam with a reverence usually reserved for septs, mending shattered mail links, lifting the dead onto wicker biers, whispering the names of brothers who could no longer answer. Every boot print in the gray slush seemed to carry equal parts grief and wonder, as though the very bog remembered how near oblivion had brushed its reeds. Atop the tallest tower of Moat Caelin, Daenerys stood alone, hair snapped wild by a hoarfrost wind. Rhaego slept in a sling against her heart, his breath warm enough to pearl tiny beads of condensation on the silver scale of her gorget. She watched the curve of the causeway below where Morghulis and the 6 younger dragons spiraled, their shadows sweeping across the pyre fields like scythes. In the hush between wing beats, she could almost taste the world reshaping around them. Winter still ruled, but winter had been forced, at last, to reckon with flame. A boot scraped stone behind her. She did not need to turn to know Khal Drogo by the weight of that stride, equal measures purpose and restrained fury. He halted at her shoulder, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. Marsh smoke gusted between crenels. Far beneath, men's voices echoed as they argued about ditch lines and deadfalls. Finally Drogo grunted, a low sound only half human, and set a block of glistening black stone on the merlon beside her. "Obsidian from the stallion's hoof," he said in rough Westerosi. "Enough now for 10,000 blades." She placed her palm on the stone, warmth pulsed within its heart like banked embers. 10,000 blades, and scarcely a moon's respite before the Night King gathers again. The words tasted of ash. "Our dragons grow, but his cold deepens faster." Drogo bared his teeth in a smile that belonged to no civilized tongue. "Then we ride north to break him before the deep nights come. Horse, fire, and wolf together." His eyes slid to Rhaego's sleeping face. "Our son will ride beneath no shivering sky." Before Daenerys could answer, a horn's call rose from the bailey. 3 blasts, then another, higher, urgent. Robb Stark's gray direwolf banner snapped against the dawn as riders clattered through the gate at speed. She and Drogo descended on iron stairs slick with rime, emerging into a courtyard shadowed by the healed heart tree Bran had coaxed from stone. The riders reined hard, and frost plumed from the horses' nostrils. Their captain dismounted and went to one knee. Wildling outriders at the last riverbeg audience, Khaleesi Tatat. They bear the Weeping King's sigil, blood-red antler in a black hand. "Mewiamasher." Daenerys blinked. Mance Rayder named himself king beyond the wall. "Who then is a weeping king?" A soft voice answered behind her. "A man who once wore a stag and learned sorrow worth 10 crowns. Stannis Baratheon stepped from the shadows of the smithy arch, mail freshly blackened, jawline still smeared with soot. He inclined his head, curt as a sword stroke. "The free folk crowned me atop the shadow tower after I burned a white eagle on the ramparts. They believed my red woman's flames. I did not ask for the title, but I cannot refuse the men who follow it. They are men." Robb Stark appeared beside him, limping only slightly on his healed leg. "The last river camp is half a league beyond our patrols. Stannis claims to bring 5,000 wildling spears, all sworn to stand beside the realm." Drogo spat into the snow. "Spears that answer to no call break like dry grass." Robb's gaze hardened, but Daenerys touched Drogo's elbow. "Grass still burns," she said, "if given enough flame to leap from blade to blade." They rode out at noon. Daenerys, Drogo, Robb, Stannis, and a small honor guard that somehow included Tyrion Lannister astride his mule Brimstone. 2 kegs of wildfire rattling in panniers. Jon Snow and Arya left earlier to harry a pocket of whites near Deepwood. Bran remained in the Weirwood Tower, tangled in roots and dreams neither waking world nor death could wholly claim. The valley north of the last river lay hushed under snow, so pristine it seemed sacrilege to mar it with hoofprints. Yet when they crested a ridge, the free folk encampment sprawled there like a dark bloom. Hide tents pitched in concentric rings, smoke threads rising from cook fires banked low against wind. Spears taller than longships sprouted at angles, each lashed with black banners dripping crimson dye. As Daenerys and the others approached, a hush rippled outward, and ragged lines of men, women, and frost-brown children formed aisles. She saw faces tattooed with swirls of green stone dust, saw bone piercings, saw wolf pelts worn by girls younger than Arya. But she saw no fear, only a stark hunger, the kind that has tasted winter's last cruelty and now stalks its devourer. At the camp's heart waited a throne of ice and hacked weirwood roots. Stannis stood before it clad in patched furs, his mailed stump of a crown forged from shattered wall buckles. Beside him Val the Spearwife held a babe wrapped in raven feathers. Behind, Tormund Giantsbane leaned on a war axe, grinning as if presiding over feast rather than parley. Stannis' gaze cut to Drogo first, the Khal who braved the wife of winter. Then to Daenerys, and the Dragon Queen who lit the neck. "You ask loyalty. I ask the same. I have faced the god of cold in open night, and know the cost. Stand with me, and I will kneel for no iron chair, only the dawn." Drogo's son stirred, whimpering. Daenerys felt Morghulis circling high overhead, restless, as though sensing the decision's weight. She lifted Rhaego so wildlings could see the slow, steady breathing of a child born of fire and horse and stone. "My husband names winter his hunt. My dragons grow impatient on their perches. But dawn requires more than riders and wings. It needs roots older than kingdoms." Her eyes went to Tormund, to Val's infant, to faces hardened in mountain wind. "If the free folk ride with us, no southern lord will call you wildlings again. You will be the dawn's vanguard, the first to strike beyond the frost fangs." A roar answered, not merely approval, but a sound like cliffs collapsing in defiance of tide. Spears hammered shields, bone whistles shrilled. In that thunder Stannis stepped down from the ice throne and drew Lightbringer, its copper glow guttered, half alive, half memory. He reversed the sword and knelt, blade offered hilt first to Drogo. Dawn's vanguard bows to the stallion who burns the night. The gesture stunned even Tormund. Drogo accepted the sword, weighing its weary heat. He ran a thumb over the fuller. "This blade is wounded." Stannis' jaw clenched. "It was never mine to wield. Perhaps it waits for a hand unafraid to burn." Drogo looked to Daenerys. She nodded once. He raised Lightbringer skyward, and the dull glow flared. A sun caught inside, dull steel. Overhead, Morghulis shrieked, a triumphant note that rattled ice from pine boughs, a league distant. That night, the wildling cooks slaughtered 14 aurochs, rubbed meat with pine resin and frost moss, and slow roasted it in fire pits fed with shattered dragonglass. Tyrell archers passed skins of arbor gold to free folk who had never tasted grapes. Dornish sand sisters traded citrus for seal blubber. Spears of 100 clans leaned stacked around the fires, and between each stack young dragons dipped to snatch sparks, weaving ember constellations across the night. Somewhere in the revel, Tyrion tapped his second keg of wildfire and handed cups to Tormund until the giant tried kissing him through his beard. Sansa Stark sat near Val, singing low songs while Val's babe gripped her mailed finger. Only Daenerys noticed Bran's ravens spiraling to roost on tent poles, black eyes glinting with moon reflection. She felt their gaze and shivered though the pits burned hot. When she closed her eyes, the crackle of sapphire echoed again, the cry of a frozen world beneath living flame. She dreamed then of snow rolling back like a tide, revealing soil soft and black, and of ghostly blossoms sprouting under starlight, each petal etched with whorls of obsidian and gold. In the dream a voice neither man's nor woman's whispered, not victory, but balance. At dawn Bran's raven arrived, bearing a single white root rune scratched across thin stone. Come. They broke camp in 400 heartbeats. The plan unrolled like a battle standard none had dared draft until that instant. Robb would hold the neck with Tyrell, Manderley, and Greywater companies, sealing any breach the Night King conjured behind their advance. Sansa would ferry wounded south to Torrhen Square where Maester Luwin organized new hospitals. Bran and Leaf would travel east with 2 dragons to weave rune walls across. And Drogo, Daenerys, Jon, Stannis, Arya, and the Dawn's vanguard would ride straight into the Frost Fangs, hunting the heart of winter. The march north lasted 9 days. The first 3, ice sheets still thawed where sapphire had scarred them. The army passed jagged holes that hissed steam as if winter breathed through punctured lung. Morgulus carved thermals above. Scouting leagues ahead, Naelora and the white dragon Sansa had named Frostwing flank. They saw no whites. No others. Only empty land stripped clean by unseen retreat. On the 4th day, the sun failed to rise. At the horizon, a bruised pall choked all color. Snow glittered oddly, each flake faceted like glass. The cold grew cunning, creeping through triple layers of fur to find joints and hearts and slow them. Voices hushed lest breath freeze mid-utterance. On the 7th morning, they found the wall. What remained of it? From a distance it resembled a glacier slain by some vaster predator. Great chunks collapsed into rubble valleys, spires lean as carrion crows' necks. Gaping rents spanned its height, edges slick and black, as though burned by frost flame hotter than forge fires. Towers of Eastwatch, half-melted, slumped against sea ice, their bells entombed mid-toll. The gate at Castle Black stood ajar, carved into a grin of broken fangs. Stannis dismounted first, boots crunching bone frost. "My watch ended too soon," he said, voice hollow as the wind through arrow slits. Ghosts seemed to pace the courtyard. Jon walked among them, gloved hand trailing charred timbers. Here he had said farewell to Sam. Here he had sparred with Gren. Now ash drifted where lads once laughed at their own clumsiness. He stopped before a skeleton still clad in crow-black rags kneeling beneath the shattered arch of Lord Commander's door. A patch of golden fur clung to the sleeve. Jon knelt, brushed snow from the skull. "Alwyn the oaf," he murmured. "You held, brother." Then he rose, fury banking in his eyes like peat fire. "The wall lives in us now. We'll show the cold what stones cannot." Leaf found cracked weirwood roots dangling through the breach, each bleeding amber sap gone hard as resin. She placed both hands upon them and sang. Far inside the Frostfangs, a tremor answered, and Daenerys felt dragons twitch restlessly on their perches. Bran, half asleep in a litter borne by 4 silent giants, opened clouded eyes. "He is closer than we guessed," he breathed. "He gathers himself to strike the flame at its source." Jon asked quietly, "Where's that?" Leaf's gaze flicked east, toward a horizon crackling with blue lightning so distant it might have been illusion. Beyond the ice lakes, atop the Vale of Sighs, there the heart of winter beats. Drogo reined his stallion beside her. Lightbringer rested across his knees, its glow strong enough that frost beads fizzed on the blade's edge. "Then we ride there. Storm, fire, and dawn. He looked to Daenerys. Sun and stars, will your wings guide us? She raised her hood, silver gold hair spilling like moon water. My dragons have tasted only skirmish. Let them feast. They left Castle Black's wreck behind like a grave unmarked. The host moved now like wolves scenting a kill. Silent, lean, unstoppable. On the 9th night, as they camped on a plateau veined with cracks that whispered steam, Morghulis plunged from cloud cover and screeched a warning that sliced marrow. An army approached, but not from ahead, from beneath. Ice split like parchment under quill. From chasms surged columns of whites, their eyes burning cinder blue in sockets rhymed white. They wielded nothing. No swords, no shields, only the fatal certainty of the dead. Behind them, shapes strode taller than giants, torsos wrought of glacier glass, antlers of hoarfrost crowning skulls carved from night. And at their center, riding a chariot pulled by undead direwolves, whose howls froze wind itself, came the Night King. He wore no helm. His face was a mask older than men, lines etched in deep striations of ice, eyes 2 shards of starless sky. Upon his breastplate swirled patterns faintly luminous, like northern lights trapped under frost. In his left hand, he held a spear formed from the spine of some titanic sea serpent, each vertebra razor sharp. In his right, nothing, for that hand ended above the wrist, severed where sapphire had once touched him at the barrel fall. Daenerys felt Rhaego stir. Dragons shrilled and banked lower, flame jittering in their throats. Drogo lifted Lightbringer. The blade erupted with dawnlight so fierce the nearest ice burst into steam. Stannis closed his eyes, reached for a faith beyond red gods. Jon raised Longclaw, not glowing, but ready. Around them, free folk knelt, pressing brow to snow, singing a low, keening dirge that rose into wind like ancestral thunder. The Night King raised his spear. The sky answered. A ribbon of aurora split open, vomiting shards of frost comet that crashed among the living host, shattering men to crimson hail. Dragons dodged banks of exploding cold. Naelora took a graze along her forewing and tumbled, rallied, shrieked rage. Drogo charged, fury breath leaping fissures. Wildlings poured after, obsidian axes flashing black rainbows in Lightbringer's glare. Every step forward cracked new rifts beneath them where undead hands clawed to the surface. Stannis and Jon fought back to back, driving toward the chariot. Tyrion's last wildfire keg rolled between skirmish knots, green flames licking at ice until they sputtered, devoured by cold so absolute it smothered even sorcery. Bran, miles away in a litter, arched, eyes vacant white, and ravens exploded from every pine, swirling above the Night King in a cyclone of black wings that pecked and tore but froze mid-stroke, falling like burnt paper. For every man the Night King felled, another rose at his side. Yet Lightbringer cut a path none could follow. Drogo smashed through the vanguard, blade blazing, and at his heels Daenerys rode a pale elk blessed by the children's songs. Rhaego strapped safe to her breast. Morghulis swooped overhead and bathed the undead wolves in such fire that their bones vitrified and shattered under harness. The chariot slewed, ice wheels gouging trenches. Drogo hurled himself from the saddle, slammed into the frost-carved platform. The Night King turned. Their eyes met, coal fury against absolute void, and metal rang once as Lightbringer struck the spear shaft. The sound was not steel on ice, but time cracking. Shockwaves rippled outward, men stumbled, dragons faltered mid-air. Snowflakes froze mid-fall. The spear's vertebrae smoked. Lightbringer's copper, glow bled white, then red gold, then searing azure. Drogo roared and hewed again, a two-handed cleave that aimed to sever crown from neck. But the Night King was no mortal. He pivoted, free hand sweeping through air that crystallized into a wall of diamond jag. Lightbringer half buried in the barrier. Ice blossomed over the blade, devouring heat. Drogo's wrists burnt with cold fire. He held fast, snarling, until joints cracked. Then Rhaego screamed. Not child's cry, Gins. The sound poured from his infant throat, riding a torrent of emerald flame that leapt 15 paces and struck the Night King full in the chest. Ice armor blistered, ran molten, refroze, cracked again. He staggered, and in that blink Daenerys vaulted onto the chariot rim with Valyrian dagger drawn. She drove it into the fissure radiating from his heart. For one heartbeat, nothing. Then, the world turned white with unmaking. Every white halted mid-lunge, limbs splaying as though strings cut. Armor rang vacant. Axes dropped dull to snow. Dragons keened confusion. The Night King's eyes widened, and inside those depths Daenerys saw not malice but memory. A man once, shackled to a weirwood, driven beyond death by children desperate for salvation. She almost wept. Then Lightbringer shattered the last shield of ice and plunged through his spine, and he exploded into kaleidoscope shards that rose on a convective surge and scattered into dawn wind. Silence dropped like velvet over the plateau. Snow hissed where it touched still sizzling shards. One by one whites collapsed and did not rise. Distant thunder rolled as glacial magic unstitched itself from the living world. Drogo knelt in the hush, hands numb around a sword now pure white, hilt to tip, forged anew by frost and fire. Daenerys clutched Rhaego, whose eyes burned molten in his tiny face, but whose body remained human and unharmed. The child's breath slowed. He cooed, reached to touch shards of floating ice that drifted downward like feathers. Where his fingers brushed them they flared gold, turned to water, then to steam that smelled faintly of cedar. Jon sank to knees beside fallen whites, pressing 2 fingers to each forehead. Nothing stirred. Arya wiped dragon blood from Naelor's wing and whispered, "Thank you." Stannis dropped his crown and let it sink beneath fresh snow. Tormund bellowed a victory shout. Echo would carry off mountains. Free folk wept openly. Bran, still miles south, exhaled. The roots beneath him pulsed gentle. Somewhere in the far north, an ancient heart tree began to bud, pale leaves despite the snow. The balance leaf had whispered, neither victory nor defeat, but equilibrium, bloomed at last. Dawn broke real and clean. First true dawn in months. Light glazed the frostfang peaks in rose and lilac. Dragons wheeled, riding new constellations across a sky no longer bruised. Men rose from knees blinking at color returned, the deep green in Val's daughter's eyes, the crimson in Tully cloaks, the burnished copper of Lightbringer fused now with veins of living crystal. No horns sounded retreat, for there was no enemy left to flee. Instead, on that plateau of broken winter, the armies of every people set shields edge to edge in a vast circle, and built a pyre of spear shafts and shattered ice. They placed no bodies upon it. There were none unclaimed by earlier knights. Only the Night King's shattered spear, bound in weirwood roots, leaf wove while singing. Daenerys placed a single scale from Morgulus atop the kindling. Drogo laid Lightbringer across it, blade still glowing, though softer now, as if content. They stepped back. Rhaego lifted his small hand. A single thread of golden flame flicked from his fingertips, touched the scale, crept through roots, and the pyre blossomed. The fire burned neither green nor red nor blue, but all colors at once, a dawn fire that hummed like a sung chord. It rose tall as a tower, and in its glare, men saw visions, fields thawing, children chasing lambs, ships unfurling sails unmarred by ice. They watched until only embers danced. When the flames ebbed, Lightbringer remained, no longer sword but seed, a core of radiance set in cooling crystal. Bran would later plant it beneath the heart tree at Moat Cailin. From that seed, stories promised, a sapling of pure light would grow, roots drinking shadow, branches bearing blossoms that opened only when the world forgot itself in despair, to remind all realms that fire remembers. For now, exhaustion folded over the victors. Drogo slung an arm around Daenerys, and they looked upon a horizon already warming to spring, though snow still lay thick. Jon sheathed Longclaw. Its edge steamed faintly in the newborn sun. Free folk began pitching tents for the first peaceful sleep in living memory. Wolves howled, not in warning, but in welcome of a world made safe enough to sing. No heralds marked the turning with trumpets. No maesters penned proclamations yet. But on wind that drifted south to King's Landing, east to Bravos and Volantis, west beyond the sunset sea, there rode a whisper born of pyre smoke and dragon wing. Winter knelt to dawn.